The story begins with two cousins, a 9-year-old boy named Richard and a 7-year-old girl named Amy. They were traveling home on a ship with Richard's father. The two children were playing mischievously, which prompted Richard's father to warn them to behave. Just then, the ship caught fire. Panic spread among the passengers, and everyone began running in all directions. Thick smoke made it impossible to see. In the chaos, Richard's father and a few others managed to escape on a lifeboat. The ship's cook, Paddy, grabbed Richard and Amy and took them onto a small boat. But because of the smoke, he lost sight of the others and drifted far away from the burning ship. Paddy and the two children floated in the middle of the ocean without food or water. The next morning, they spotted an island in the distance. Paddy, relieved, rowed the boat to shore. The island was lush with greenery and coconut trees. Paddy began exploring the island, hoping to find people who could help them, but it was deserted. Realizing they were stranded, Paddy also noticed that the island had everything necessary for survival. He even found a barrel of liquor that had washed ashore from the ship. One day, while playing, Richard found a human skull. When he showed it to Paddy, Paddy told him to throw it away, instantly realizing the island might be dangerous. To keep them safe, Paddy moved with the children to the other side of the island. That night, while drinking, Paddy heard the sound of drums coming from the far side of the island. Curious and uneasy, he swam toward the sound. There, he saw pieces of human flesh placed on top of a statue. Horrified, Paddy realized the island was used for human sacrifices. He returned to the children and sternly told them, "Promise me, no matter what happens, you must never go to that side of the island. It's the law here, and you must obey it." The children, however, couldn't help but wonder why Paddy was so strict about it. Paddy explained that cannibals lived on that side and ate children. Richard comforted himself by believing his father would eventually come to rescue them, and Paddy also hoped someone would save them. But until then, Paddy took full responsibility for the children's safety. He taught them how to find food, build shelter, and survive in the wild. Over the next 2 months, Paddy made sure they learned enough to survive even if something happened to him. One night, after drinking heavily, Paddy noticed his liquor barrel drifting into the sea. He tried to retrieve it but, in his drunken state, nearly drowned. The next morning, Richard and Amy woke up to find him missing. Looking through the spyglass, they saw Paddy lying on the sand on the far side of the island. They took the small boat to reach him, thinking he had simply drunk too much and fallen asleep. But when they tried to wake him, he didn't respond. They realized Paddy had died from excessive drinking. The loss saddened Richard and Amy deeply. They were now completely alone. Amy told Richard, "I miss Paddy so much. I can't stay here anymore. Please take me somewhere else." Richard agreed. They gathered their belongings and sailed to another part of the island, where the forest seemed more welcoming and food was plentiful. They built a new shelter there. At first, life was a little difficult, but thanks to Paddy's teachings, they managed well. Slowly, they adapted to life on the island. Years passed, and Richard and Amy grew up. Richard was now 21, and Amy was 19. They fished together, gathered fruits, and lived peacefully side by side. But gradually, changes began to happen to their bodies and minds, changes they didn't fully understand. One day, while bathing in the river, Amy experienced her first period and saw blood. Terrified, she called out to Richard. When Richard came and asked what had happened, Amy, embarrassed, told him to go away. Later, when she came out of the water, Richard asked again, thinking she might have hurt herself. Amy said nothing, which annoyed him. He thought, "She used to tell me everything, but now she's keeping things from me." Over time, Richard and Amy began to feel a strange attraction toward each other. When Richard walked around without a shirt, Amy would quietly watch him. And when Amy bathed in the river, Richard's gaze would linger on her. But since they had been isolated on the island since childhood, without any social knowledge or education, they didn't understand these feelings. They had never learned about such things, and so, they remained unaware of what these changes truly meant. Richard spent his days fishing and gathering fruits, while Amy cooked the fish and washed their clothes. Together, they lived happily on the island, sharing laughter and small joys. Yet, deep inside, they still held on to the hope that one day Richard's father would come and rescue them. One day, Amy heard the sound of drums coming from the side of the island Paddy had forbidden them to visit. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to see for herself what was there. When she arrived, she saw the same statue Paddy had once spoken of, the one from which blood had once dripped. But to Amy, it felt like a sacred place, as if it belonged to a god. Excited, she ran back to Richard and told him, "I went to the other side of the island, the one Patty told us never to go to. I saw a statue there, it belonged to a god. Patty lied to us. There are no cannibals there." Hearing this, Richard became angry. "We promised Patty we'd never go there. You've made a big mistake. From now on, don't ever go to that side again." That night, while Amy was asleep, she had a nightmare. She saw Richard drowning in the sea. She woke up frightened to find morning had come and Richard was standing before her. She told him, "Promise me you'll never leave me." They embraced in an emotional moment. Richard kissed her and began to take things further, but Amy pushed him away. That night, Richard tried again to get close to her, but Amy told him to leave. This angered him, and the next morning, he refused to speak to her. Later, Amy noticed Richard doing something behind a rock but couldn't tell what it was. When she called out to him, Richard snapped at her. A short while later, as Richard was picking coconuts from a tree, he spotted, for the first time in years, a ship in the distance. Shocked and excited, he quickly climbed down and ran toward a hill where they had once prepared wood for lighting a signal fire to attract passing ships. But he was too late, the ship had already moved far away. At that time, Amy had also seen the ship. She too had the chance to light the fire, but she didn't. By now, she felt at home on the island and had accepted this life. When Richard found out she hadn't lit the fire, he became furious. "I'm sick of you. I'll leave this place alone," taking the boat and setting off. But halfway across the water, the boat broke apart and Richard fell into the sea. Forced to return to the island, he was met with Amy's laughter. "This island is our home now," Amy told him. "We have to stay here." Richard grew angrier, and the two began to argue. Their quarrel escalated into insults. Amy said, "I know what you do behind the rocks. I'll tell your father." Richard shot back, "You spy on me." Amy replied, "You watch me too, when I bathe." Enraged, Richard threw a coconut at her but missed. Amy then threw one back, hitting him on the head. Richard slapped her and drove her out of their hut. "I built this shelter. You can't stay here. I won't give you any food either." Amy was forced to sleep outside and find food on her own, which was very difficult for her. Richard mocked her during this time. In desperation, Amy began offering flowers and praying to the statue she had seen before. But on her way back from the sea one day, she stepped on a venomous stonefish. Intense pain shot through her foot. Struggling, she somehow made it back to the island shore. Seeing her sick and weak, Richard asked, "What happened?" Amy told him, "I stepped on a stonefish. I'm poisoned and feeling worse." She added, "Take me to my god." Richard carried Amy in his arms to the statue. Her condition worsened, and she lost consciousness. Panic filled Richard's heart. "If something happens to her, how will I survive alone here?" he thought. He prayed to the god for Amy's life. After some time, Amy regained consciousness, fully healed. The island's energy, peace, and environment had restored her strength. Relieved, Richard told her, "I was so scared. If anything had happened to you, what would I have done here alone?" Amy asked softly, "Were you angry at me?" Richard replied, "No." After that, the two of them returned to their island. One day, Richard and Amy were sitting together, talking. Suddenly, they found themselves looking at each other with affection, and they kissed. For the first time, they understood the hidden feelings of love they had for each other. Soon after, they became intimate, and this new bond brought them great joy. They began living like a couple on the island. Months passed. Richard noticed that Amy no longer came close to him the way she used to, and her behavior had changed. He asked her, "Don't you love me like before?" Amy replied, "I don't know. I haven't been feeling well. I've also been feeling nauseous." Then she took Richard's hand and placed it on her stomach. "I think something different is happening inside me," she said. Richard also began to suspect the truth. Amy was pregnant, but neither of them understood it clearly. Richard thought perhaps she was simply eating more, and that was why her belly was growing and there was movement inside her. One night, Richard heard strange noises coming from the other side of the island. When he went to investigate, he saw a group of island natives sacrificing a man in front of the statue. Terrified, he ran back to Amy. But just then, Amy went into labor and began screaming in pain. Richard quickly rushed to her side and helped her through the delivery. Amy gave birth to a baby boy, and both of them were overjoyed. They named the child Tari. They brought the baby back to their small hut. The child cried, so Richard and Amy tried to feed him water and food, not realizing that he needed his mother's milk. When Amy held him in her arms, he naturally began to feed from her. Richard then told Amy about seeing the natives and warned that if they came to this side of the island, they might harm them. But Amy said that if they attacked, she would not let them go unpunished. After Tari's arrival, Richard and Amy were even happier. They loved the child deeply. Years passed, and the boy grew. They taught him how to swim, play, and talk. One day, while the three of them were playing in the mud by the sea, Richard's father arrived in a ship with some men, searching for them. But from a distance, when he saw the three mud-covered figures, he didn't recognize them and sailed away. Richard and Amy saw the ship but didn't know Richard's father was on board. They didn't call out to it. They were afraid that returning to society would mean living among people who would never understand them. Later, Richard, Amy, and Tari took their boat to the other side of the island to pick fruits, the same place where they had stayed for months before Patty died. Looking around, they remembered their childhood days there. Richard went off to gather fruit while Amy stayed near the shore with Tari. As he played, the boy picked some poisonous berries and left them in the boat. Amy didn't notice. Amy began to feel sleepy. When she woke, she saw the boat had drifted far from the shore. Suddenly, Tari dropped one of the oars into the water. Amy tried to retrieve it but couldn't. She shouted for Richard. Richard swam toward them, but Amy warned, "There's a shark behind you, hurry." Richard swam faster toward the boat without retrieving the oar. Amy struck the shark with the remaining oar, giving Richard the chance to climb aboard. But now they had no oars left to row back to the island. They tried to paddle with their hands, but the strong current pushed them farther into the open sea, and the fear of sharks kept them from swimming. The boat drifted away all day. Tari grew hungry and, without his parents noticing, ate the poisonous berries. When Amy and Richard realized what had happened, they tried to get the berries out of his mouth, but he had already swallowed them. Thinking their son was going to die, they each ate some of the berries themselves. All three lay down in the boat, waiting for death, and eventually lost consciousness. But in reality, the berries weren't deadly, they were only mildly poisonous. They had simply fainted. Not long after, Richard's father, who was on a ship scanning the sea with binoculars, spotted a small boat in the distance. He showed it to one of his men, and they set out in a smaller vessel to investigate. When they reached the boat, they found Richard, Amy, and Tari unconscious. Richard's father asked one of his men, "Are they dead?" The man replied, "No, sir. They're just asleep." And so, they were finally rescued. This is where the story ends.